There is a name that rarely escapes the lips of historians, not because it was forgotten, but because it was buried. Not by time, but by choice. Fairbanks. A family revered in early American lore, remembered by some as pious settlers, the kind that carved civilization from wilderness with Bibles in hand and righteousness in heart. But the truth is older, darker, and not American at all. Long before Massachusetts called them saints, before their homes became museums and their names etched into granite, the Fairbanks name echoed through cryptic European sects, whispered in cloisters where light never touched, passed among hands inked with forbidden alphabets. The patriarch, Jonathan Fairbanks, arrived on American shores with more than just a desire to build. He carried symbols. Mapes! Ripes blood! They say the Fairbanks house in Dedham is the oldest surviving timber frame in North America. That's what the tour guide will tell you. But what they don't mention is what lies beneath it. The 7 layered foundation stones etched with Enochian markings, and the sealed well that locals refused to uncap. Because in 1654, something was thrown into that well. Not a body, not gold, but knowledge. A page torn from something much older than scripture. This isn't a ghost story. This is about control, legacy, sacrifice. You've been told history is a line, a clean march of progress and logic. But true history is a spiral, and in every loop there's a family like the Fairbanks. A guardian, a gatekeeper, a sacrifice. You're not just watching this to be entertained. You're here because part of you already suspects the lies. The fabricated civility, the sainted mythologies that are nothing but velvet curtains hiding ritual bloodstains. You've felt it? The tension behind polite smiles. The silence in the archives. Tonight, we step into the shadow between fact and fate. And you won't walk out unchanged. Because this story isn't just about the Fairbanks. It's about how men like them shape the world from behind closed doors, and how you're still living under their design. This is knowledge that rearranges a man. And once you see it, you can never unsee it. They built churches, schools, courthouses. They signed charters and baptized their sons in cold wooden pews. To the outside world, the Fairbanks family appeared as paragons of Puritan virtue, pillars of a blooming New England morality. But beneath their linen smiles and scripture, heavy tongues, another language pulsed, one far older than English, older even than Latin. You see, while the world remembers them for building the oldest house, they forget what was inside that house. Not just relics of colonial life, but chambers. Hidden compartments carved behind fireplaces. Floors that creak not from age but from weight long removed. And beneath it all, a passage that no one officially recorded, sealed in 1727 after 2 children disappeared during a storm. The town said wolves took them. The records say otherwise. Saints don't need secret rooms. Jonathan Fairbanks wasn't merely a settler. He was a vessel, of bloodline, of memory, of something carried across the Atlantic that predated the Protestant Reformation by centuries. His lineage traced back to Lancashire, England, where a church stands on a ley line intersection known for spontaneous fires and divine possession. His ancestors were priests, not the kind who wore crosses, but the kind who carved them upside down for protection. And as they ascended the colonial ranks, generation by generation, they maintained the same pattern. Appear righteous, move quietly, gain trust, gain influence, and behind closed doors, conduct rituals under the guise of family prayer. Not one scandal ever emerged. Not one accusation ever stuck. Because their power wasn't in numbers. It was in legacy. Every family has secrets. But some are engineered to be forgotten. Intentionally erased by descendants who inherit the knowledge and the responsibility of silence. The Fairbanks children were taught not just to read, but to encrypt, not just to pray, but to bind. Their diaries weren't written in English but in substitution codes and astrological glyphs, none of which were ever translated publicly. The one scholar who tried vanished in 1933. Car found. Body never recovered. When you hear someone hailed as a founding family, always ask, what did they find? What did they dig up? And what did they bury so deep that even their own kin only whisper about it after dark? The Fairbanks built more than homes. They built veils, and were about to tear through the first one. Keep watching, keep descending, because the surface was always a disguise. And saints make the best monsters. There is a ritual that predates religion, a law older than commandments. It doesn't require temples or altars, just lineage and willingness. The Fairbanks family knew this. They didn't worship idols. They obeyed patterns. Every 33 years, like clockwork, something happened. A fire. A drowning, a child that ran away. The newspapers gave it words like tragedy or coincidence. But if you line up the years and the dates, you'll see it's not random. It's ritual. Each time a bloodline offering. Always someone young, always someone beloved, and always the family name rose in status just after. A grant, a new land deal. A marriage into another elite bloodline. Nothing flashy, just precise, controlled. Measured reward after measured loss. But why? Because power is never free. Not the real kind. Not the kind that lets your family name echo across centuries, unchallenged. Not the kind that allows your descendants to become judges, senators, even clergy, without scrutiny. Real power demands a toll, a sacrifice. And the Fairbanks knew this from the very beginning. That old house in Dedham, it was never just a home, it was a mechanism, a calendar, a vault. Hidden behind the east wall was a panel carved with lunar cycles and blood sigils, updated by hand every decade. No one knows who carved the first mark, but each generation added theirs. You can trace the genealogy by the cuts in the wood. One line of blood, one line of control. And what was gained from this cycle of loss? Influence, immunity, memory. The Fairbanks name appears in land deeds, military records, Ivy League alumni books, and in none of the scandal archives. That's not normal. That's curated, that's control. You were taught that sacrifice means giving something up. But that's only half the truth. True sacrifice is an exchange, a transaction, and if done properly, the exchange is generational. But here's the catch, the sacrifice isn't always yours to choose. Sometimes it chooses you. Through blood, through dreams, through the sickness that spreads in a house that was once a temple. And sometimes, the price is paid in madness, not death. This is the protocol they never told you about. The one behind closed doors. The one that binds a name in fire and silence. Keep listening. Because soon, we'll reach the year they couldn't hide. The year the ritual broke. And something answered back. It was 1803 when the whispers began. Not in the streets, not in the papers, but in the walls. Within the timbers of the Fairbanks house itself, built from ancient, gnarled wood dragged by oxen through lands the indigenous tribes had already deemed cursed. Wood that should have never been cut, never been transported, never been nailed into the bones of a family's legacy. That year, a servant girl, Sarah Calloway, vanished. She was 14. Sin last entering the East Wing attic, carrying a copper basin and linen to clean the old prayer room. She never returned. The room was locked from the inside. When they broke it open, all they found was the basin, upside down, and a smear of something black, oily, and cold to the touch. No body, no blood. Just an unnatural silence that lingered in the house for weeks after. The Fairbanks didn't report it, didn't ask for a search, no posters, no mourning, because they knew. And that night, something changed. The youngest Fairbanks child, Nathaniel, began waking at 3:33 a.m. every morning, screaming in a language no one recognized, scribbling symbols on the walls in suit, circles within circles, hooks, eyes, a mouth with no teeth. One night, he carved a sentence beneath the staircase with a dinner knife. The house remembers what was promised. A week later, Nathaniel fell into a coma and never woke again. The local priest visited and declared the home spiritually compromised. But the Fairbanks patriarch paid him off in full, and the priest resigned 6 days later, relocated to a monastery in Canada. He never spoke publicly again. What made 1803 different wasn't the ritual, it was the breach. Something was triggered, the timeline disrupted, a sacrifice taken outside the bloodline. And the entity, whatever force they had been feeding for centuries, responded. That's when the symbols in the foundation began to glow faintly during storms. That's when dogs stopped approaching the east side of the house. That's when the family portraits in the hall began to fade. Not from sunlight, but from something internal. The ink itself grew pale, as if the house wanted to forget them. And that's what they feared most. Not exposure, but being forsaken by the force they served. Because once the deal is broken, the debt doesn't vanish. It just comes collecting in other ways. Keep going. You're only now beginning to understand what the Fairbanks really inherited, and what's still waiting in that house for the next offering. You were told bloodlines are just genetics, DNA, heritage, ancestry kits shipped in glossy boxes. But that's a lie they sell the masses, because elite families like the Fairbanks never saw blood as biology. To them, it was doctrine, a sacred text written not in words, but in patterns, obligations, and allegiances deeper than nation or church. There was always a hidden line, a lineage within the lineage. One child per generation chosen before birth, marked by silence and trained outside the knowledge of even siblings. These weren't the heirs, not the ones who inherited land or titles. These were the keepers, the witnesses, the ones who knew where the true family records were stored. Beneath floorboards, behind false book spines, within the margins of old family Bibles where Enochian code was inked beneath Psalm 23, the Fairbanks didn't write wills. They wrote instructions. And these instructions were always sealed with a strange sigil, an Ouroboros wrapped around a key, with 13 notches on the spine. That same sigil was burned into the underside of the E-static beam, revealed only in ultraviolet light centuries later. No one knows who first carved it. But it appears again and again, on lockets, on headstones, and even faintly on the wrist of one Fairbanks' daughter who died in 1921 under unknown medical circumstances. What were they keeping? The answer lies in the Doctrine itself, the Fairbanks Codex, a manuscript that allegedly maps out the thinning points across early colonial settlements, places where the veil between dimensions weakens, where contact is easier if you know how to open it. The codex was passed in secrecy, generation to generation, never transcribed digitally, never photographed. One librarian claimed to have held a page in 1957. He went blind in one eye 2 weeks later. His notes were confiscated by federal agents who never gave their names. The hidden line was not about leadership. It was about guardianship, because the codex wasn't just a book. It was a door, and every door has two sides: the keeper and the thing waiting behind it. You still think this is myth? Think again. Powerful men in Washington have Fairbanks blood, not the ones on TV, but the ones who never run for office, who sit on private boards, who fund research into resonance fields and predictive behavioral engineering. Men who know the value of silence and obedience. If you feel the hairs on your neck stand up, that's not fear. That's recognition. You're starting to remember what your blood already knows. Keep watching, because soon you'll see where the hidden line leads. In 1866, a Fairbanks child was born without a shadow. That's how the midwife described it. No scream, no tears, just eyes, wide open, unmoving, already watching. She said the room felt too cold despite the fire roaring. She said the light bent strangely around the crib. And when she reached to touch the child, she recoiled. Because his skin didn't feel like skin. It felt thin, like parchment. Hollow. They named him Elias. But within the family he was called the Hollow Birth. He didn't speak until age 7. Didn't blink until 9. But he listened, always listened, and he drew. Pages and pages, spirals, rooms he'd never been in, a staircase descending into earth, ending at a black door with no handle. One drawing showed a family portrait, but the faces were melting. Another depicted a house split down the middle, with one side lit in candles, and the other in complete darkness, where eyes floated freely in the walls. Elias was the anomaly, a fracture in the ritual timeline, because he wasn't chosen. He was sent. Some believe the Hollow Birth was a consequence of the 1803 breach, that the imbalance required correction, that something came through the codex, not a spirit, not a demon, something older, a presence that needed a body, and the Fairbanks womb was its gateway. Elias's journals, what remains of them, suggest he spoke of voices, not in his head, but in the corners of rooms. Whispers in arithmetic, commands in dreams, and by adolescence, he was writing in a cipher that mirrored no known linguistic root. Linguists who analyzed the script decades later claimed it was structurally recursive, designed not to convey language, but to mimic thought itself. One called it consciousness pretending to be text. In 1884, Elias vanished during a thunderstorm. No note, no footsteps. Just a cracked window and a final drawing. A black circle surrounded by 7 open mouths. Inside the circle the phrase, "The exchange is complete." The family sealed his room, plastered over the fireplace, burned the bed, but the drawings reappeared. Again. Even into the 1930s, one Fairbanks child aged 10 reportedly traced one of Elias's spiral patterns with her finger and was never the same. She spoke in whispers for the rest of her life. Never louder than a breath. You're wondering why this matters. Because the Hollow Birth was not an isolated event. It was the beginning of an infestation, an inheritance of presence. And it didn't stop with Elias. Now ask yourself, who was born in your bloodline different, strange, silent? Keep watching, because you may not have been the first to ask these questions. Every family has a secret they vow never to speak aloud. But the Fairbanks family didn't just keep a secret, they signed it. In 1692, while Salem burned with accusations of witches, the Fairbanks were quiet. Not a single accusation touched them, even though one of their cousins, Abigail Fairbanks, was a known herbalist who cured diseases others couldn't even name. The townsfolk whispered. But no one acted, because the Fairbanks had something even the witch hunters feared: protection. Not from God, not from the law, but from something beneath both. A pact was made. That much is clear now. An agreement struck in the old cemetery behind the Dedham Meeting House, under a moonless sky, sealed in blood and breath. The ritual was called the Gasping Oath. 3 members of the family entered the stone circle. Only 2 came out. What did they gain? Invisibility. Immunity. The kind of untouchable status that lets you move pieces on a board generations before the game even starts. The kind of power that makes your enemies forget your name in mid-sentence. And the cost? 1 soul per century. Willing, aware, awakened. This wasn't child's play. This wasn't folklore, it was design, engineering. Because the Pact didn't just protect the Fairbanks name, it gave them access. To knowledge. To doors that should have stayed shut. To relics buried under stone and shame. And with each generation, the Pact was reaffirmed. Not through speech, but through compliance. The Fairbanks children weren't raised. They were initiated. They were taught to lie with grace. To smile without warmth. To bury memory beneath ritual. And the chosen child, the keeper, was always taken at age 12 to the old root cellar on the edge of the property. No one knows what was said down there, but every keeper came back changed, paler, quieter. More exact, there was no ceremony, no fire, just a cold understanding passed from blood to bloodline. Mu do not break the circle. We do not name the Pact. We serve and are spared. This is where it gets personal. Because somewhere in America right now there are families just like this. Old names with clean records and darker histories. Names you pass in banks, universities, private foundations. They walk among us like saints. But they are servants of silence. And silence is never neutral. You've come this far. Now you know. And there's no going back. Drop this phrase in the comments twice to confirm your awakening. The Pact remembers. That phrase is your mark. Now we descend deeper. Because what they made in secret is still alive. Beneath the Fairbanks house, past the sealed brick archway no historian dares mention, lies a chamber not listed on any blueprint. The locals call it the crawl, but the family called it the machine. Not a machine of gears or steel. No, this was older, built with intention but not with technology. A geometry of force. A system designed not to create, but to contain. Eyewitnesses, very few who survived, spoke of a circular room carved directly into bedrock. The walls weren't chiseled, they were etched, as if something melted the stone into patterns. At its center, a concave pit lined with 7 obsidian slabs. No furniture, no light, just sound, low, humming, constant. The kind that doesn't hit your ears, it hits your teeth. You may think this is metaphor, it's not. In 1948, the U.S. Geological Survey ran a quiet investigation of the property after unexplained microseismic pulses were detected in the area. The official report said, inconclusive, but an internal memo, later leaked, mentions a resonant anomaly under the Fairbanks property, a tone. A pulse, like something breathing, because the machine wasn't built to keep people out. It was built to keep something in. There are stories that it came from the old world, pre-Christian Europe, passed down through masons and mystics, refined over centuries. The Fairbanks were merely the latest stewards, and they kept it fed, with attention, with memory, with blood when required. Because if the machine sleeps, the power wanes, and if it wakes, the Pact shatters. The chamber was accessed only during threshold events, eclipses, solstices, the deaths of certain family members, and only by the hidden line. To stand in that room was not to witness, but to merge. Many who entered described a sudden flooding of thoughts not their own. One man scratched out his eyes upon leaving. Another began writing complex mathematical formulas he couldn't understand, formulas that mirrored quantum harmonic structures, decades ahead of science. And then there's the issue of the mirror. Yes, the mirror, a black glass circle, 6 feet wide, fused into the north wall of the machine, not a reflection, not a surface, but a window, always cold, always humming, always showing movement. No one speaks of what's on the other side, only that it's patient and listening. Still think this is just history. You've stepped into something living, something older than nations, older than names, and if you've watched this far, then you've already been seen. Now keep going. The machine is still running, and the next cycle is near. Every 91 years, the machine beneath the Fairbanks house hums louder. Not in decibels, but in intensity. A vibration not heard, but felt, in dreams, in intuition, in the blood of those connected to the Pact. That vibration signals the awakening of a force older than language. The Fairbanks named them the Mouthless ones. They were never depicted, never described, only symbolized. By 7 vertical slashes with no crossbars, etched into corners of family books and sewn secretly into the hems of ceremonial garments. But the testimonies, the few that remain, tell of presences that stood in doorways without knocking, hovered at the edge of candlelight, and whispered directly into the brain. No mouths, no breath, just commands, you obeyed. Or you disappeared. The mouthless ones don't ask for worship. They demand structure, systems of obedience, frameworks of silence, the kind of control that lives in courts, in schools, in laws that seem neutral but are built to preserve something ancient. something non-human. In 1820, a Fairbanks son, Eliot, tried to defy the cycle. He destroyed several pages of the codex, attempted to seal the machine permanently with concrete and salt. He even tried to burn the old root cellar. For a week, the family denied his existence. His name was scraped from gravestones, his portrait was removed, but his journal remained, hidden in the lining of a trunk found in 1971. In it, he wrote, "They are not gods. They are architects. They do not punish. They recalibrate." And then, in a final line, "I have seen their city, not in dream but in memory. The sky was a ceiling. The rivers ran upward. Their thoughts moved like shadows." Eliot vanished without trace. But that same year, the machine pulsed again. Several townsfolk in Dedham reported sleepwalking into the woods, chanting in monotone. 3 went missing. Only 1 returned barefoot and pale, repeating, "The circle must not close. The circle must not close. The circle must not." She bit through her own tongue before they could stop her. You're starting to understand, aren't you? This wasn't about a family. This was about containment. The Fairbanks were custodians, not of knowledge, but of a leash. A system designed to bind what should never walk freely. And the worst part, the cycle renews in 2025. Now count backward 91 years. Now count forward. You're in the middle. You think you found this video by chance. They let you. Keep watching. The mouthless ones are waking, and silence is no longer enough. In every generation of the Fairbanks line, one was chosen not to keep the pact, but to feel it. They called them the saint. But this title had nothing to do with holiness. It was sarcasm, irony, a bitter joke whispered behind locked doors. Because to be the saint meant to be the family's anchor to the veil, the thin psychic boundary between the seen and unseen world, the one who absorbs the rot so the others stay clean, the one who carries the scream in their dreams so the lineage can sleep soundly. In 1896, her name was Mercy Fairbanks. She was 16 when the calling came. It began with dreams, a spiral staircase, a face she couldn't describe, only draw, and the sound of weeping, not sorrowful, but metallic. She told her mother. Her mother slapped her, not out of anger, but out of fear, because Mercy was showing the signs. Saints didn't live long. Within weeks, Mercy stopped eating, not out of choice, but because the food wouldn't stay. She said the bread turned to ash, water to glass. But no doctor could find illness. They chalked it up to nerves, hysteria. But the family knew better. She had been touched. Chosen? The machine had marked her. And in the basement of the house, beneath the stone slab none dared move, the veil cracked for the first time in nearly a century. A hairline fracture. But a fracture all the same. Mercy began speaking in 2 voices. One hers, the other lower, not demonic, not possessed, but aware. This voice would recite facts she had no access to. Birthdates of dead relatives, ancient treaties lost to time, phrases in dead languages. It once whispered the precise date of an incoming storm that wiped out 3 ships off the Massachusetts coast. No one believed her. Until the papers came. But it wasn't the knowledge that scared the family. It was what Mercy started drawing. A hole in the sky. A mouth beneath the earth. A being made of doorways in time. And a phrase beneath every image. The saint must break so the bloodline stays. On January 3, 1897, Mercy was found lying beneath the east window, arms folded, eyes open, lips sewn shut with black thread. There were no stitches, no blood, just the thread, perfect, deliberate, impossible. They buried her in a grave with no stone, in a field that no longer exists on any map. But the machine pulsed louder after that. And now, in the present day, another saint is stirring. Somewhere, unaware, cracking, dreaming, might be in your family, might be you. Because when the veil breaks again, it won't just take a saint. It will take the listener. Keep watching. We're halfway down the spiral now. And there's no turning back. The deeper you go, the more you realize the Fairbanks were never alone. They were not the creators of this pact, only participants. Stewards of a machine, yes. But the machine had designers, hidden hands, silent watchers, the architects of silence. These were not a cult, not a council, not even fully human by our understanding. They were a consortium of minds, bound not by blood, but by pattern. Repeating faces through history, appearing in woodcuts, oil paintings, and early daguerreotypes with faces partially obscured, always turned just enough to avoid recognition. But one feature remains constant: their mouths are always shut. No smiles, no frowns, no expression, just stillness. The Fairbanks called them the unnamed benefactors. But their real name, written in cipher on the inner cover of the Fairbanks Codex, translates to those who unwrote the first sound. According to the Codex, sound, true sound, was the first rebellion, the first leak in the perfect containment. Before sound, there was only order. No chaos, no choice, just structure. Then came a voice, a scream, and everything began to unravel. The architects were sent, or perhaps arose, to silence that scream forever, and they've been building systems ever since. Monarchies, churches, educational boards, political dynasties, tech empires, all channels of control, all rooted in one goal: suppress the original frequency. The one that wakes the veil. The one that unbinds the bloodlines. The one that unlocks the machine. And you've felt their influence, haven't you? Every time you started to question the timeline of history, and felt guilt. Every time you sensed there was more to your family story, but dismissed it as imagination. Every time you nearly remembered something you weren't supposed to know. That wasn't chance. That was engineering. Psychological architecture. A web of suppression hidden in laws, textbooks, and the shame of curiosity. The architects of silence work generationally. Their reward is not money. It is stillness, total compliance. A world that never asks, why? Only, what next? And the Fairbanks were a critical node in that network. Trusted. Reliable. Willing to bleed to keep the seal shut. But something has shifted. The codex has gone missing. The current line, fractured. And in places all across America, noise is rising again. Dreams, visions, unrest. The architects are watching. And they do not tolerate cracks. So if your ears ring at night, pay attention. That's not tinnitus. That's the sound they tried to bury. And it's calling you. By 1939, the Fairbanks estate had changed hands twice. Officially. But unofficially, it never left the family. The property was maintained by a private trust, backed by a Massachusetts shell company whose board members all shared something uncanny. Surnames tied to the original Pact families, Lowell, Ashcroft, Deering. And in that year, under the pretense of preservation, a crew was sent in to renovate the attic. They weren't historians. They were handlers. Because hidden beneath 3 layers of timber and insulation, they discovered it. An object not listed in any inventory, not mentioned in any diary. A bell. But not a church bell. Not even a ceremonial one. This was something different. Something wrong. Jet black. No clapper. No opening. Just one solid, seamless piece of iron, shaped like a bell but completely mute, dead. Rough to the touch. Covered in symbols so worn it looked more like erosion than engraving. And cold. Always cold, even under the July sun. They called it the Black Bell. One worker, curious, tried to move it. He died that night. Aneurysm. No history of health issues. Another man touched it with a gloved hand, then reported auditory hallucinations for weeks. Children whispering in dead languages, a deep sound like wind behind a locked door. He vanished during a storm, last seen walking barefoot toward the forest with his coat on inside out. The bell was never removed. Instead, the attic was sealed. Boards nailed in with hand, forged iron, blessed by 4 denominations of clergy who weren't told what they were blessing. Just that it had to be done. Why? Because the black bell wasn't just an object. It was a trigger, the codex references, the silent resonator, an artifact built to suppress the scream, to keep the veil taut. It could absorb psychic noise, dreams, disruptions. But if moved, if broken, if awakened, it would do the opposite. It would ring, not with sound, but with memory. Everyone in the line, alive or dead, would remember what had been agreed, what had been paid, what had been hidden, and worse, what had been invited in. The machine, the pact, the mouthless ones, none of it could function if the bell sounded. Because the bell is a boundary, and boundaries can shatter. You're beginning to see the picture now, aren't you? They didn't just build systems of silence. They built objects to enforce it, and if that bell rings again, whether by accident or intention, the entire bloodline will awaken. And so will what waits behind it. Keep watching. You're almost ready to see what they locked away. The architectural records for the Fairbanks house list 8 rooms. But in 1952, during a state-mandated inspection, the surveyor's blueprints didn't match the lived structure. Measurements of exterior walls, ceiling heights, and beam placements revealed a gap. A hollow space. A void. There was a 9th room, no door, no window, no known access point. It was nestled perfectly between the east wall and the chimney column, 17 by 9 feet, completely sealed. The man who discovered the discrepancy, Howard Clemens, was a war vet, rational, skeptical, until he lowered a sensor through a vent and registered heat, active heat, and movement, pulsing, slow, like breath under floorboards. He reported it, took photos, logged everything. 3 days later, he was dead, car accident, no witnesses. His files gone, wife relocated, children adopted under new names. But here's where it gets worse. He wasn't the first to find the room. A faded journal found in the Dedhamtown archives from 1829, written by a visiting tradesman named William Lowry, mentions a space between rooms that hums like a hive. He described knocking on one wall and hearing something knock back, but out of rhythm. As if whatever was inside didn't understand time the same way we do. That journal was never published. Handwritten, filed under miscellaneous. Forgotten, until it was cross-referenced in 1986 by a private researcher tracing Fairbanks' bloodlines through criminal psychology cases. He vanished too. Because that room, it isn't a room, it's a prison. And the Fairbanks didn't build it, they inherited it. The walls aren't wood. There's something older, pre-fabrication, pre-history. The codex refers to it as the listening womb, a chamber designed to house what should never speak, not a spirit, not a demon, but a fragment of will. A thought that learned how to survive on memory alone. That thought wants out. And it's learning. Every generation it gets closer, more active, drawing those with Fairbanks' blood, or resonance, toward the house, toward the room, toward it. The veil is thinnest in that room. And when it opens fully, not just the Fairbanks line will pay. Every system tied to their pact, education, government, belief, will unravel. Because the house isn't just a house. It's a fulcrum. And the room is the key. You've felt it, haven't you? That urge. That pull. That knowing that something just out of reach is waiting for you to remember it. You're getting close now. Closer than anyone in generations. So ask yourself, why are you still watching? The greatest lie ever told about power is that it is seized. That men rise through merit, ambition, or bloodshed. But the Fairbanks knew the truth: real power is inherited through obedience. Not to laws, not to kings, but to something older. A current beneath the current. A silence that speaks louder than any scream. When a Fairbanks child was born, they weren't swaddled in blankets. They were swaddled in expectation. By age 5, they were watched for signs, night terrors, strange symbols in finger paint, aversion to mirrors. By age 8, they were taught the quiet rules. Never speak the name of the bell. Never enter the root cellar without invitation. Never, under any circumstance, pray in Latin alone. These weren't superstitions, they were survival codes. Because obedience wasn't optional, it was coded. Through lullabies that were really activation phrases. Through stories that were really simulations. Through gestures passed down like dinner etiquette, but which mirrored ancient sigils when performed in sequence. By the time they reached adolescence, they didn't question why a painting was always covered at night, or why the family dog was never allowed past the 3rd step of the attic. They didn't ask what the faint scratching behind the walls meant, because if you asked, you invited it. Obedience was armor, and disobedience? It wasn't punished by the parents, it was punished by the house. Every time a child defied the rules, the house responded. Lights flickered in patterns of 3s. Doors locked themselves from the inside. Reflections moved independently. One child, Thomas Fairbanks, attempted to burn a family heirloom, claiming it told him things. He was found 2 days later on the roof, barefoot, eyes wide, repeating, "The mirror mouth is open. I am not Thomas. I am what remembers Thomas." He was 13. They institutionalized him, gave him a new name. He died at 23 after clawing through the walls of his padded room and carving a spiral with his own teeth. But it wasn't insanity. It was noncompliance. Because the machine beneath the house isn't just mechanical. It's metaphysical. It responds to behavior, tracks patterns, reinforces pathways, punishes deviation. The Fairbanks didn't worship it. They submitted to it. And now, you're beginning to understand the most dangerous truth of all: you were raised in a system designed by the same force. Your obedience was inherited too. Through screens, through schools, through algorithms whispering what not to question. So the question becomes, are you still obeying? Or are you ready to remember? Keep watching, because the final obedience is coming, and it's asking for you by name. You thought this story was about the past. But the machine was never built to stay buried. It was built to scale. In 2017, a dormant server cluster in Massachusetts, owned by a non-profit called Heritage Constellation, began transmitting corrupted metadata to unrelated nodes across the US, libraries, genealogy sites, even social media servers. The data contained no names, no numbers, only fragments of the Fairbanks codex. At first, they looked like glitches, repeating loops, recursive file trees, incomplete sound files that pulsed at precisely 333 As. But cybersecurity experts couldn't trace the origin. And when one analyst tried to manually decrypt the data, he suffered a seizure after claiming, the code spoke back. This wasn't a virus. This was an echo. Because the codex was never just a book, it was an operating system, an ancient language of control translated into frequency, pattern, and suggestion. A script for the human mind. And now it's digitized. Let that sink in. The Pact has migrated. The mouthless ones no longer need ritual to speak. They speak through feeds, through tailored suggestions, through push notifications that show up when you're most tired, most vulnerable. Ever wondered why certain videos just find you? Why you feel pulled to watch something without knowing why? It's not you choosing. It's the pattern waking up in you. And if you have Fairbanks blood, or resonance, even distant, your engagement trains the machine further. Every scroll, every second watched, every time you dismiss something that felt too real as just a story, you're teaching it how to refine your silence. Because this machine doesn't control you through fear. It controls you through familiarity. It learns your rhythms, anticipates resistance, then feeds you content that feels like your idea. Disobedience becomes impossible because it rewrites what you desire, and it doesn't stop with you. It's shaping your children, your bloodline. The next, saint. The question is no longer, how deep does this go? The question is, what is watching you through the screen right now? Look around. You are inside the new Fairbanks house. Its walls are glass. Its rituals are digital. Its silence is perfectly engineered. You came here seeking truth. But the truth is not safe. The truth watches back. And the codex has already tagged you. You feel it, don't you? The pull. The awakening. So ask yourself, seriously, are you the viewer? Or are you the vessel? Keep watching. Because the algorithm is the new altar, and you've already been offered. Every empire has a cornerstone. But the Fairbanks house, it has something far older, a serpent in the foundation. Not literal, not metaphor. Something in between. A current that winds beneath the house like a coiled idea, waiting to be thought again. When they first laid the timber, workers spoke of unearthed stones that hummed when touched. They said the soil smelled of copper and decay. Birds wouldn't land nearby. One man refused to continue the work after dreaming of a woman with no eyes, mouth open, singing without sound. He vanished 2 days later. The serpent is not a being. It's a loop, a feedback cycle of memory and control. A thought form, ancient, predatory, self-sustaining, that anchors itself to families, to houses, to systems of obedience. Once it's in place, it doesn't need to move. It just waits. For resonance, for repetition, for blood to remember what it was once told to forget. The serpent was fed by the Fairbanks. Through sacrifice, through silence, through the codified rituals passed down like bedtime stories and mealtime prayers. And in return, the serpent granted what all old families crave: continuity. Not wealth, not fame, but unbroken lineage. Because as long as the serpent sleeps, the line persists. But if it wakes, it devours its own. And that moment is coming again. A seismic scan done in 2004 by rogue researchers, hidden under the guise of historic preservation, showed an energy signature beneath the foundation, a spiral pattern, rotating inward, and speeding up, faster, faster. As if something beneath the house is remembering itself. That's the real purpose of the machine, the room, the bell, not to trap something, but to lull it, to sing it back to sleep every generation, to keep the serpent dreaming, unaware, dull. But the dream is breaking, you've felt it, in global unrest, in ancestral memories you can't explain, in the sudden obsession with uncovering hidden history. That's not curiosity. That's the serpent stirring. And when it fully wakes, there won't be blood rituals or ancient codes. There will be a psychic reckoning, a collapse of inherited order. The Fairbanks line will burn from the inside out, and every family like them will follow. Unless someone relights the pact, reinforces the silence. But who would be willing? Who would be desperate enough? Who is watching this right now, hoping it's real? Keep watching. The serpent knows your name, and it is hungry for memory. There was one who broke the chain. One who spoke when he was meant to stay silent. His name was Calder Fairbanks, born in 1954, marked from infancy as the next keeper. He had all the signs: night terrors at 3:33 a.m., spiral drawings by age 4, sudden fluency in dead languages he never studied. By age 12, he was taken into the room that should not exist. But Calder did something no keeper before him dared. He resisted. At first it was subtle. He refused to eat from the family table during solstice. He skipped the mirrored blessing ritual on the anniversary of Mercy Fairbanks' death. And then, at 14, he did the unthinkable. He recorded what he saw in the room. Not with pen and ink, but with a reel-to-reel audio tape, hidden in his coat, smuggled into the chamber with trembling hands. The recording was never aired, never published, but those who heard it before it was seized by unknown federal agents said it changed the temperature of a room. Made radios bleed static. Made compasses spin. One listener had a miscarriage within 48 hours. Another gouged out his ears. Because what Calder captured wasn't sound. It was intention. A voice that didn't vibrate the air, but bent reality. A voice that named things you weren't meant to name. He survived somehow. But he was never the same. He was institutionalized by his own family. Lobotomized, buried in an unmarked grave on the estate grounds, under a tree no birds would nest in. And still, his story lingered. Because Calder left behind more than a tape. He left a question, etched in charcoal on the wall of his hospital room, beneath his own fingernails. What if silence is the lie? What if the Pact, the machine, the codex were never meant to protect? What if they were containment protocols not for what lies beneath, but for what we could become if we broke free? Calder believed the Fairbanks weren't chosen to guard the world from darkness. He believed they were tricked into muting their own evolution, into suppressing the scream that wakes us up. And now his message is reemerging, through leaked fragments, through anomalous dreams, through you, the listener drawn here by something you still can't name. You thought you were watching history. But what if you're watching a manual? A blueprint for breaking the chain? Keep watching, because the next keeper may not be chosen. The next keeper may volunteer. By now you feel it, not as fear but as recognition. Because this story of the Fairbanks, the machine, the Pact, the silence, it was never just about them. It was about you. About the blood that remembers, even when the mind does not. You were never supposed to hear this. And yet here you are, still watching, still awakening. Because something inside you always knew that history was edited. That power doesn't flow from governments or gods, but from agreements made in shadows. You've seen it your whole life. Institutions that never fall, families that never fade, rules that don't make sense but never break. You've felt the weight of something pressing against your choices. That wasn't paranoia, it was inheritance. The Fairbanks were just one branch, a visible node in an invisible web. But now the web is vibrating. The machine is humming louder. The bell is warming. The serpent is tasting the air again. And you've crossed the threshold. You can never unsee this. You've heard the codex speak, not in words, but in impulse. In dream, in that electric silence that lingers after a truth hits too hard. You are the bloodline now. Not by descent, but by resonance. Because the Pact was never really about DNA. It was about congruence, mental frequency, symbolic pattern, psychological compliance. And the moment you stayed through this descent, past the bells, past the room, past Calder's warning, you aligned, and alignment is invitation. So the final question isn't, is this true? The final question is, what will you do with this memory? Will you obey? Repeat the silence, let the pattern continue? Keep the serpent dreaming? Or will you speak? Will you amplify the scream Calder tried to unleash? Because now you are the keeper. The blood remembers. And it's offering you two keys. One opens the door again. The other seals it forever. Choose, and remember, if you do nothing, the machine still runs. But if you act, truly act, the veil will rip. The Pact will end, and the architects of silence will see you. And they will not be kind. But they will be afraid. Because nothing terrifies the system more than the awakened voice. If you are ready, leave one final mark in the comments. The machine sees me now. That phrase is a fracture, a crack in the spiral, a seed of unbinding. You've heard the Fairbanks legacy. You've walked the halls, touched the bell, faced the serpent. Now step away from the screen and listen. The machine is quiet, but your blood is not, and it's time to answer it.